Picture this. It's 300,000 years ago. The sun just dropped behind the horizon like it's ghosting, and you are standing in the middle of absolute bone-deep darkness. No streetlights, no phone flashlight, no little green exit sign glowing in the corner. Just you, your bare hands, and a symphony of sounds you cannot identify, coming from directions you cannot see, made by things that can absolutely see you. And here's the fun part. You are, biologically speaking, one of the worst equipped creatures on the planet to be out here right now. No claws, no fangs worth mentioning, no night vision. You're slow, you're squishy, and you smell like a snack. If this were a horror movie, you wouldn't even be the main character. You'd be the guy who dies in the first 5 minutes so the audience knows the threat is real. And yet, somehow, your ancestors made it through thousands and thousands of these nights. Not once, not by luck. Over and over for hundreds of thousands of years until eventually one of those terrified half-blind primates figured out how to turn the most dangerous part of the day into something they could survive, then something they could use, and eventually something they could completely dominate. So tonight we're going all the way back to find out how. Because the story of how humans survived the dark isn't just some dusty anthropology footnote, it's basically the origin story of civilization itself. Fire, storytelling, superstition, your weird fear of the dark that you still have as a fully grown adult with a mortgage, all of it traces back to these nights. Stick with me, because it gets a lot weirder than you'd expect. Let's start with the bad news, because there's a lot of. Humans are what scientists politely call a diurnal species, which is a fancy way of saying we're built for daytime and basically useless after dark. Our eyes are packed with cone cells, the kind that need decent light to work, and comparatively few of the rod cells that let animals like cats and owls see in near pitch black. Step outside on a moonless night, and you're not just a little handicapped, you are functionally blind. You can't tell a bush from a crouching predator at 20 feet. You can't tell if that shape by the water is a fallen log or something with teeth deciding whether you're worth the effort. And it's not just the eye. Think about every advantage a predator has over you in the dark. A lion's eyes have a reflective layer behind the retina called the tapetum lucidum that bounces light back through, giving it night vision roughly 6 times better than yours. A hyena can smell blood from over a mile away. Wolves can hear a twig snap that you'd never even register. Meanwhile, you, the supposed apex predator of the savannah, are stumbling around with the sensory equipment of someone doing a trust fall blindfolded, except the trust fall lasts 8 hours and there's no one there to catch you. So here's the actual question worth asking. If we were this vulnerable, why didn't we just go extinct the first week some early human decided to take a stroll after sunset? And the honest answer is, which for a long time, a lot of them did. Nighttime was almost certainly one of the leading causes of death for early hominids. Paleontologists have found bite marks on ancient hominin bones from leopards and giant hyenas, and there's strong evidence that these animals specifically targeted humans and human ancestors as prey, especially the young, the old, and the ones dumb enough to wander off from the group. Darkness wasn't a mild inconvenience, it was a filter. It killed the careless and the unlucky, generation after generation, and it shaped every single survival strategy that came after. And it wasn't just the famous predators either, the lions and hyenas that get all the documentary screen time. Early humans were dealing with an entire nighttime cast of characters. Leopards, which are ambush hunters specifically built to strike from above, from trees, from ledges, from exactly the kind of spot you'd never think to check. Saber-toothed cats, which went extinct only relatively recently in evolutionary terms, and were more than capable of taking down prey much larger than a single human. Giant hyenas, some species significantly bigger than the hyenas we know today, hunting in coordinated packs with a bite force that could crack bone like it was nothing. And on top of the big obvious threats, there were snakes you couldn't see until you'd already stepped near them, and insects and parasites that were just as happy to bite you in the dark as anything with fangs. Basically, imagine every single nightmare scenario from a survival video game, except there's no respawn, no health bar in the corner of your vision, and no pause button. That was just a normal Tuesday night for a human roughly 300,000 years ago. Which brings us to the first real breakthrough, and honestly the most important. Never, ever be alone. Early humans figured out pretty quickly that a lone individual in the dark is basically a vending machine for predators. But a tight group packed together, making noise, taking turns staying alert, is a completely different math problem for anything hunting. This is where the idea of a watch probably starts. Someone stays awake while the others sleep, then wakes the next person, and so on through the night. Sound familiar? It should. It's basically the ancestor of the night shift, of camping trips where somebody has to keep the fire going, of parents taking turns getting up with a crying baby. You're still doing a version of this. You just don't realize your group chat is doing the same emotional labor a Paleolithic watch rotation used to do. There's also a quieter, less obvious adaptation happening here, one that doesn't show up in fossils but almost certainly shaped the group's survival just as much as anything else. Hearing. When your eyes stop working, your ears have to pick up the slack, and there's decent evidence that human hearing sensitivity, especially to the kinds of low rustles and snapped twigs a stalking predator makes, would have been under serious evolutionary pressure at night. Ever notice how a completely silent house at 2 a.m. suddenly makes every creak of the floorboards sound like a full home invasion? That heightened, almost paranoid sensitivity to small sounds isn't a modern quirk. It's a leftover setting from a version of your brain that used to genuinely need it. And it wasn't just about who was awake and listening, it was about where you actually put your body to sleep in the first place. Location mattered enormously. A cave mouth was valuable real estate specifically because it only had one entrance, meaning a predator couldn't flank you, only approach from a single, defensible direction. Elevated ledges and rock shelters were prized for similar reasons: hard to climb, easy to watch from. Some early hominin groups may have even nested in trees at night, the way modern chimpanzees still build sleeping platforms up in the canopy every single evening, specifically to get away from ground-level predator. Real estate agents like to say, location, location, location. For your ancestors, that wasn't a catchy slogan. It was the literal difference between waking up the next morning or not waking up at all. But sticking together only gets you so far when you're still sitting there completely blind. The real game changer, the single biggest cheat code in the history of human survival, was fire. And I want you to really sit with how insane this actually is. At some point, some human ancestor looked at a wildfire, one of the most terrifying, destructive forces in nature, something every other animal on the continent was actively fleeing from, and thought, I bet I could keep a little bit of that. Not extinguish it, steal it, domesticate it, carry a piece of literal apocalypse around in a pouch and feed it twigs to keep it alive. We're talking about control of fire going back at least 1 million years, based on burnt bone and ash deposits found at sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, and there's evidence some hominins were using fire even earlier than. And once early humans had reliable fire, the entire equation of nighttime survival flipped. Suddenly you had light, suddenly you had warmth, which meant you could survive in colder climates and higher latitudes where the nights get brutally long, and suddenly, most importantly, you had a predator deterrent, because it turns out most large carnivores have an instinctive fear of fire baked into their nervous system. A pride of lions that could absolutely wreck an unarmed human without breaking a sweat will generally just not approach a burning campfire. Fire didn't make humans strong. It made every other animal's strength irrelevant. Here's where it gets even crazier though, because fire didn't just keep predators away, it fundamentally rewired human society. Before fire, when the sun went down, that was basically it for the day. You hunker down, you go quiet, you wait for sun, because there's nothing else to do and nothing you can safely do. But firelight extended the day. It gave humans several extra hours every single night where they were awake, alert, safe-ish, and crucially, not doing anything survival related, just sitting together around a light source. And what do you think a group of intelligent, social bored primates do when they're stuck sitting in a circle with nothing to hunt and nowhere to go? They talk. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Ju-Huansi in the Kalahari have actually documented this directly. During the day, their conversations are almost entirely practical. Where's the water? Who's doing what? Complaints about someone's brother-in-law? Normal daytime stuff. But at night, around the fire, the conversation shifts almost entirely to storytelling. Myths, histories, jokes, gossip about people who aren't there, cautionary tales about what happens if you wander off alone at night, which, considering everything we just talked about, is extremely good advice dressed up as folklore. Researchers believe this nightly firelight ritual might be one of the actual origins of human culture as we know it. Not the campfire as some cozy aesthetic choice, the campfire as the original social media platform, except instead of doom scrolling, you're doom listening to your uncle explain why the moon is angry at you. And speaking of the moon being angry at you, let's talk about fear itself for a second, because this is where things get genuinely fascinating. You know that slightly uneasy feeling you get walking to your car in an empty parking garage at night, even though statistically you're probably fine? That's not a personality flaw. That's an inheritance. Fear of the dark isn't a random glitch in human psychology. It's an evolved trait, and a pretty successful one, because the humans who felt zero anxiety about wandering into pitch black, unknown territory alone were, generally speaking, the humans who got eaten before they could pass on their gene. The nervous, jumpy, I don't love this, let's go back to the group. Humans survived at a noticeably higher rate. Congratulations. Your anxiety is a 500,000-year-old survival tool that your brain just never got the memo to turn off, even now that the scariest thing in your parking garage is a guy looking for his car too. This fear also shaped how early humans slept, and this next part might genuinely change how you think about your own sleep schedule. Before artificial lighting existed, historical records and some modern isolated communities suggest humans commonly practiced practiced something called segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. Instead of one continuous 8-hour block, people would sleep for a few hours, wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night, sometimes to talk, have sex, tend to the fire, or just quietly think, and then fall into a second sleep until morning. But let's not romanticize this too hard, because for every triumphant cave painting, there were 1,000 nights that were just pure, unglamorous terror management. Imagine actually being in one of these groups. You hear something moving in the brush. Is it wind? Is it a hyena testing the perimeter? You don't know, and you can't know because you can't see more than a few feet past the fire's glow. Modern hunter-gatherer accounts describe exactly this kind of hyper-vigilant nighttime state, where every unexplained sound triggers a spike of adrenaline, where sleep is genuinely lighter and more fragmented because some part of your brain never fully clocks out. This is very likely where a huge chunk of universal human folklore comes from: monsters that live in the dark, spirits that only come out at night, warnings not to leave the safety of the fire. These weren't just spooky bedtime stories invented for fun. They were survival information encoded into narrative because a story is a lot more memorable and a lot more likely to get repeated and passed down than a plain instruction like, don't go out there after dark, statistically, you might die. Turns out, humans have been using scary stories as a public safety campaign since before we had written language. The original, don't try this at home. So let's zoom out for a second, because all of these pieces, fire, group vigilance, storytelling, star navigation, the fear response baked into your nervous system, they're not separate, unrelated survival hacks. They're layers stacked on top of each other over hundreds of thousands of years, each one making the next one possible. Fire gave humans light and safety. Safety gave them time and attention to spare. That spare time and attention turned into storytelling and social bonding, which strengthened group cohesion, which made the group even better at watching each other's backs at night, which meant more people survived to pass down more knowledge, which eventually led to better tools, better shelters, controlled agriculture, permanent settlements with walls and watchtowers, torchlit streets, oil lamps, gas lamps, and then, only extremely recently in the grand scheme of things, the electric light bulb, which by the way didn't happen until the late 1800s. That means for well over 99% of the time modern humans have existed on this planet, night was still something you had to actively, seriously survive, not something you just casually ignored by flipping a switch. And honestly, that puts a lot of modern life in a strange new light, if you'll forgive the pun. That flicker of unease you feel when the power goes out and suddenly your house is properly, completely dark, that's not silly. That's your ancient survival software booting back up after being dormant your entire electrically lit life. Every horror movie that uses darkness to build tension is tapping directly into an instinct that took hundreds of thousands of years and an untold number of casualties to install in your brain. Every campfire you've ever sat around with friends, telling stories, laughing, maybe getting a little too into a ghost story that has zero business scaring a grown adult. That's a direct, unbroken cultural descendant of a nightly ritual your ancestors depended on for their literal survival. You're not just enjoying a nice evening outside. You're performing a ritual older than agriculture, older than writing, older than most of what we consider civilization. It's also worth pointing out just how recent our escape from all of this actually is, because the timeline makes it almost absurd. Widespread electric street lighting didn't really arrive until the early 20th century. That means your great-great-grandparents, people whose actual faces might still exist in a photograph somewhere, lived a huge chunk of their lives in a world where nighttime still meant genuine, thick, inconvenient darkness the moment a candle or lamp burned out. We like to think of ourselves as living in some completely different modern reality compared to our ancient ancestors, separated by this vast, unbridgeable gulf of time and technology, but in terms of actually being safe in the dark without a second thought, that gulf is more like a few generations wide. You're not that far removed from all. You're just the first few generations lucky enough to never have needed the lesson. So let's go back to where we started. You, alone, in absolute darkness, 300,000 years ago, badly outmatched by everything around you. Except now you know the rest of the story. You know that some version of you, not literally you, but your ancestors, generation stacked on generation, figured out that the answer wasn't to become stronger or faster or better equipped with claws and night vision. Historian Roger E. Kirch found hundreds of references to this first sleep and second sleep pattern in old diaries, court records, and literature going back centuries, right up until until artificial lighting became common and squished everyone's sleep into a single block. So if you've ever woken up at 3 in the morning for no reason and just stared at the ceiling, congratulations again, you might just be running the original human operating system. You're not broken, you're vintage. Now, fire and group vigilance solved a lot of problems, but they didn't solve everything, because darkness isn't just dangerous, it's also disorienting, and disorientation kills just as effectively as teeth do. If you can't navigate at night, you can't travel. You can't track migrating animals that move seasonally, and you definitely can't find your way back to camp if you get separated. So early humans did something remarkable. They turned the night sky into a tool. Long before anyone wrote anything down, humans were tracking the moon's phases to time hunts and gatherings, using the position of stars to hold a direction while traveling after dark, and passing that knowledge down orally from one generation to the next. Some researchers argue that certain prehistoric cave markings and carved bones with repeating notches, some over 20,000 years old, may actually be lunar calendars. Humans literally scratching a record of the moon's cycle into bone so they wouldn't have to rely on memory. Think about that next time you check the moon phase on your phone to figure out if it's a good night for stargaze. You're doing the exact same task some hunter-gatherer was doing with a piece of antler and a sharp rock, except your version has push notification. And once fire became something a group could reliably maintain rather than something they had to opportunistically scavenge from a lightning strike, it started shaping physical space too, not just social behavior. Camps started forming a kind of geography around the flame. The fire sat at the center, sleeping areas clustered close around, tools and food storage a little further out, and a rough, unspoken perimeter beyond that where the darkness took back over. That basic layout, safe center, working middle ring, dangerous edge, is honestly still how a lot of human spaces are organized today. Whether it's a campsite, a village square, or even the layout of a house with a well-lit living room in the middle and that one dark hallway nobody likes walking down alone. You've inherited the floor plan along with the fear. Eventually, as groups got better at maintaining fire and passing the knowledge down, keeping the fire alive became one of the most important jobs a community could assign, sometimes ritually significant, sometimes literally sacred. Many later human cultures, from ancient Rome's Vestal virgins tending an eternal flame to countless indigenous traditions around the world, involving a communal hearth fire that was never allowed to go out, trace a straight line back to this same core, ancient anxiety. If the fire dies, the night wins. Letting the flame go out wasn't just inconvenient. In a lot of these traditions, it was treated as a genuine community failure, because on some deep, half-remembered level, everyone still understood exactly what that fire was actually protecting them from. Here's another twist that a lot of people don't expect. That same firelight that kept predators away and gave rise to storytelling, it's also very likely responsible for some of the most famous art in human history. Deep inside caves like Lascaux and Chauvet in France, archaeologists found extraordinary paintings of horses, lions, and bison, some over 30,000 years old, tucked far back in chambers where sunlight has literally never reached, not once, not for the entire existence of those caves. The only way anyone painted those images, and the only way anyone would have ever seen them afterward, is by fire. Hand-carried torches or animal fat lamps, flickering, unstable, throwing moving shadows across three-dimensional cave walls. Some researchers even think that artists deliberately used the cave's natural bumps and curves so that flickering torchlight would make the animals look like they were moving, which is, if you think about it, an early prototype of animation, made 10,000 years before anyone invented the wheel. Humans took the single, scariest, darkest environment imaginable, a deep cave at night, no natural light source ever, and turned it into an art studio. That's either the boldest or the most unhinged creative decision in the history of our species, and honestly, it might be both. The answer was to get smarter about being vulnerable together. Steal a piece of fire, take turns watching, tell each other stories to make the fear mean something, read the sky when you had to move, and slowly, painfully, across an almost unimaginable stretch of time, that fragile, half-blind, terrified group of primates didn't just survive the night. They rewired what the night even meant, from a death sentence to a danger, from a danger to a routine, from a routine to a ritual, and eventually from a ritual into the very foundation of everything we now call human culture. So the next time you're lying in bed at 3 a.m., wide awake for no obvious reason, staring at the ceiling with your heart doing something slightly dramatic over absolutely nothing, maybe don't reach for your phone right away. Maybe just sit there for a second in the dark. Because that feeling, that specific, ancient, deeply irrational unease, you didn't invent it, and you're not stuck with it by accident. It's an heirloom. It's the exact same feeling that once kept an entire species alive long enough to eventually build streetlights, invent Netflix, and forget it ever needed to be afraid of the dark at all. Funny how that works.